Hi, I'm Tracy Soltis, your leading health and nutrition coach and molecular biologist. I've consulted with hundreds of people around the world on their human journey. So if you're a seeker looking for answers, information and knowledge, you'll find it here. Come on a journey with me as I explore the science, the physical body, and the cognitive and energetic space of what it really means to be human. All right, welcome back everybody, and I have a super treat for you guys today because I have the very lovely and beautiful Carrie Reedy joining me. Hi Carrie.
Hi.
Carrie is a university qualified nutritionist with specialist training in functional nutrition and lifestyle medicine. She's extremely passionate about helping people use food as medicine, I love that, to support their health and healing. She advocates lower carbohydrate intake to promote better metabolic health and fuel delivery to the cells of the body so they can function optimally. Carrie is a certified keto coach, yay, and has completed training with the Nutrition Network in therapeutic carbohydrate restriction diets. Her core message is that there is hope for a greater health and well-being when we use our everyday food choices to optimize our nutritional status, allowing the body to take better care of itself. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you for coming on. And we're going to try not to get distracted because the first time that you and I met, we went off on a completely different tangent, didn't we?
I think we felt like we were kindred souls, didn't we?
It was so beautiful, actually. It was such a beautiful connection because I think we were here for like an hour and a half getting to know each other, and we were just talking about all sorts of universal stuff before we even got to the main topic, which I loved because I just felt so connected. So it's just so lovely to meet another soul kindred spirit on this journey. So I'm very thrilled to have you here. And we're going to be talking about a very important topic very close to your heart. What is that topic today?
So today we're going to be talking about lipodema, which is a condition that so many people go, what was that? I didn't quite catch that. Is that lymphedema you're talking about?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a great opportunity to talk about it during June, which is International Lipoedema Awareness Month.
Perfect. And I want to just take a step back and just talk a little bit about you first before we get into this topic. So tell me a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got involved in this sort of awareness program for people.
Sure. Well, my story goes back even sort of further. I'm a mum with 6 kids. Some of my older kids had some health concerns, and I probably went down the traditional medicine road initially with them, but it turned out that wasn't really what they needed, and so I started to sort of delve into alternative treatments for them. After doing everything I could to help support them and their health, I just felt like I had a passion and a connection for looking more holistically at our health in general, you know, in their health, in my whole family's health. And we were able to make some great strides in their health conditions. And eventually people, you know, friends would say, oh, what should I do with my kid, or what should I do? And I figured that I really needed to actually have some sort of more formal qualification before I could give people any sort of advice. So that's what I did. 6 kids in tow, and I went back to university.
Wow, that's incredible. Good on you. What a journey that is too as well. And so how was that experience for you?
Yeah, well, it really cemented the understanding that I already had, and it made me even more passionate about being an advocate for people's health in general. And, you know, over the course of my working with ladies now as a qualified nutritionist, I found that lots of people would come in and talk to me and say, oh, I've got this health condition, oh, and I want to lose some weight. It was always like that add-on at the end rather than the first thing that they would say.
Yes.
And so whilst my original desire was to become a bit of a health detective and help people understand what was going on underneath all of their signs and symptoms, that was kind of where my original passion was. I just found more and more people came to me to help support, you know, health goals in terms of weight. And I found that, you know, for some people you could give them a great diet plan and they'd go away and they'd be happy as Larry, everything would work. But there was a certain group of people that they just didn't seem to get the same results, and it didn't make any sense. And I guess it was that detective sort of aspect of my thinking that just kept coming through, like, what is it about these particular people that aren't getting the benefits that all of the rest are? And maybe it's that compassionate mum heart, but I just had this great deal of empathy for these ladies that most of them were, you know, they were doing 150%, you know, and not getting the results, yet those that were maybe doing 70 or 80% were having great results. And it just made no sense.
Yeah, and it is really sad that our system at the moment is very Band-Aid focused, isn't it? And I'm so happy to, when I come across people like yourself come onto my path, is that people who are getting to the root cause of situations and trying to help people from a foundational perspective rather than waiting for symptoms to get so extreme that then there's so many intervention type things that have to happen to even monitor and help those people. And so I just love that. So thank you for, helping everybody. It's amazing.
Well, it's my passion. And I really feel like the earlier we can intervene in these things, in a preventative manner, the better. It's harder to kind of wind some of these health conditions back. But, if we can intervene early, understand what's going on with someone's health, with their metabolism, we have far more opportunity to intervene and turn things around.
And, I've been studying science and I'm always trying to keep up with all of the things science. But when you actually contacted me and with this topic, lipodema or lipodema, I had never heard of it before. And I had to go away and do my own little research and exploration myself because it's not something that comes up very frequently. And so maybe you can explain for people that are listening, like what it is and how it's different to the other one, which was it, the
lymphedema.
Lymphedema.
Yeah.
So because people might have heard of lymphedema a little bit more. So what is the difference between the two and what is lipodema?
Sure. So lipodema has been characterised as a connective tissue disorder or as a adipose tissue. That's the technical term for fat tissue disorder. But to really give that sort of clarification, so lymphedema is a condition that people can experience often as a consequence of an accident or some sort of surgery where the lymphatic flow of the body becomes impaired. Some people do have a genetic predisposition, so they may be born with impaired lymphatics, like the whole system hasn't developed properly. We call that primary lymphedema. Secondary lymphedema is where it's a result of some sort of intervention that's inhibited that flow of lymph through the body. And the typical symptoms of that are swelling, oedema in various parts of the body. Typically, it's only in the impacted area. And so you would get like one limb or some people do get it sort of more globally, but typically more like a leg or an arm or something else. But lipodema, in many ways, they can look similar, which is tricky for making a diagnosis of the condition. But the lymphedema has to do with lymph flow. Lipodema has more to do with impaired, repair of the fat cells, inflammation in those fat cells that then leads to scarring in the fat tissue. Ultimately, when it's not addressed early, we do then end up with a condition that we call lipolymphedema, which is actually the two conditions joining together where you're going to have a lot of damaged fat tissue that then impacts in a secondary way that lymph flow. So then you end up with the swelling and the edema as well, which is sort of the end stage of the condition. Hopefully we intervene far earlier than that so people don't end up with that situation.
Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit more specific about what lymph is, so for people, but also what are some of the very first signs that come up before people are even aware of it? So something that, so that we can kind of focus on and anchor on to what the signs might be.
Absolutely. Yeah. So great question to ask. What even is lymph? I tend to talk about these thinking like everyone knows what we're talking about, but everyone knows that we have a circulatory system that sends the blood all around the body. The heart uses, is the pump that makes this circulation happen. But we actually have an not alternative in the sense that it does the same job, but we also have another system that moves fluid around the body, which is lymph. It's mostly water, but it's actually, if you think about it in terms of the blood is taking the nutrients and the important things to the cells, the lymph is actually then taking the discarded, maybe the
all
the byproducts, all
the
the rubbish back to the general circulation so that it can get processed through the liver, and ultimately we get rid of that. But you can imagine that if that becomes impaired, that detoxification becomes an issue, that, we do get this swelling in certain parts of the body, and that's ultimately part of what we think is happening with lipodema as well, that fluid's not being moved quite as well, maybe not to the point that it's a diagnosable condition, but it's not moving so well, which can contribute to inflammation around those cells. And we know that inflammation tells the immune system to come in with all of its resources, and we end up with things like macrophages, which
Yes.
are white cells that are kind of a bit like Pac-Man. They're doing their job, kind of trying to fix everything, but they create a little bit of debris on their way, and they can create some scarring. And that's what we think now is potentially what's happening in the cells that are leading to this scar tissue formation.
Yeah, and a lot of people are familiar with the term inflammation, right? So whenever we have inflammation, we tend to get swelling or lots of fluids or bloating and lots of stuff going on because the body's responding as an immune response type situation.
And it's doing exactly what it needs to do.
Yeah.
It's calling in all of those resources to try and repair and heal, but we don't always get immediate resolution to that inflammation. You know, sometimes it can linger and that becomes chronic inflammation, and that's where inflammation becomes the not so beneficial process that happens in the body.
And so what are some of the very first signs that a person or a woman particularly, because this is a situation that 11% of women actually face, so that's significantly high.
It's often referred to as a rare condition, but I wouldn't call something that
11%.
occurs.
Yeah, it's not rare.
It's not rare at all.
You would say like under 1% would be rare.
Yes.
But for me, like as a scientist, like I'd be like, well, it's not rare. It's not common, but it's definitely not rare. I mean, 11%, that's significant. That's more than 1 in 10 people.
That's right.
You know,
That's
so
right.
you put 10 people in a group, more than one of you is potentially going to have this condition.
And I think when we talk statistics like this, we need to recognise that lipodema is a progressive condition. So many people will have it in the early stages and not even be aware. It's really maybe those people that have progressed to a really significant stage with this condition that, yes, they are potentially more rare. But this is likely has a hormonal component to it. So we typically see it in 99.9% of people who experience it are women.
Yeah.
And often lipodema will start to sort of show up either at times of hormonal flux, so puberty, pregnancy, menopause. So this is where people start to think, well, I've just put on a whole lot of weight, but it seems to be disproportionate. Sometimes people refer to it as being pear-shaped, that it tends to happen that this weight goes on around the buttocks, around the hips, around the thighs, and so we end up with that more pear-shaped with still a very small middle, but then we end up putting on weight in those particular areas. And I guess, how does that differentiate from simply having weight issues?
Yeah.
This lipidemic fat, I suppose you would refer to it as, doesn't readily respond to either exercise or to diet change, in the sense that calories in, calories out, eat less, exercise more, doesn't have positive benefits with this. So people come to me and say, well, I've been exercising, I seem to have lost weight around my middle, but I just cannot budge the weight that's anywhere else. But in addition to the weight going on disproportionately in the lower half of the body, this is referred to also as the painful fat disease, because the tissue, due to the inflammation and the scarring in there, is quite uncomfortable. You just have to have like a kid kind of crawl up on your lap, and something that should be so lovely to have a little one curl up and have a cuddle. Yeah. For you, it's like, you just feel like you've been whacked with something really hard. So, pain in the limbs, the disproportionate distribution of the fat. Often women tell me that they have frequent bruising. They'll get up in the morning and they'll, go to have a shower and they're like, oh my goodness, I don't even remember doing that. And they'll have a bruise the size of a plate.
Wow.
And it's because we have some leaky capillaries that are going on that contribute to that too, which again is probably part of that underlying issue that's going on that creates this lipidemic fat.
Yeah, it's so interesting because we always resonate with fat going onto the body when there's been an abundance of calorie intake coming in, but this is very different to that. It's not necessarily something that's even in the same ballpark, so to speak. It's completely separate. And so I think recapping all of that, like if you are experiencing any issues where you are exercising and you can't seem to shift the weight or it's painful, I think that's probably the number one thing, isn't it? That's a true indicator for people.
For sure.
Is like a pain response on the body, any bruising and things around there, then it's definitely time to kind of source out people like Carrie and other professionals who might be able to help you before things get worse. So I know that we actually, when we sat down and we talked about this issue to start with, there's multiple stages that happen for women. And it's quite sad and it's quite horrific for the women that are having to struggle through this. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what those stages look like.
Sure. So in its early stages, they actually, like most conditions, we have stages and types. So I've talked about the disproportionate fat in the lower half of the body, and that's typically in the early stages, like stage 1, where we would see that, typically in that area of the buttocks, the thighs, and around the hips. So that's where we would sort of see the disproportionate fat, but the skin would still be quite smooth. And at that point, you're likely to just think, I just need to diet some more, which, can become a bit of a catch-22. And we can talk about that a little bit more if you want to. So stage 1, the skin tends to be fairly smooth. As someone moves into stage 2, that skin's likely to become more, we refer to it as being like a mattress, like sort of dimpled, rippled. People often think about it as being like cellulite, but it's a little bit different to cellulite, because really what's starting to happen is that fibrosis or scar tissue is really progressing underneath the skin, so it's giving a real dimpled look to the skin. By the time someone moves to stage 3, they're likely to experience this in more than just their upper part of their legs. It's more likely to progress, under the knees, down even as far as the ankles, and you're likely to get quite significant overhangs of fatty tissue. Yeah. And then by the time you move into stage 4, that's really where that lymphedema and the lipodema have just coincided. And so you're going to get incredible swelling, but like massive overhangs of skin, which are incredibly painful. If you think about it in terms of the skin has a matrix that holds it all together, and yet you get these big lumps and bumps. That's dragging on that cellular that structure as well, which further contributes to inflammation, further contributes to pain. And this is where if you saw someone on the street, you would be like, oh, wow, there's something really significant going on with them. But in its early stages, stage 1, even into early stage 2, a doctor's likely to say, oh, you just have some weight issues, go home and exercise more and eat less, because this is not well recognised. Certainly there's only a handful of practitioners here in Perth that have a whole lot of understanding of the condition. In terms of if somebody's hearing this today and thinking, wow, there's a whole lot of things that resonate with me, differentiating between lymphedema, lipodema and obesity really is something that only a trained expert can do. I'm a nutritionist, so that's not my area of expertise. You'd really need to see an occupational therapist or a physiotherapist that can diagnose and, differentiate between those 3 things, so that what's the right direction for you and what's going to be the best way to move forward to help support a reduction, I suppose, in progression. Because what we do know with this condition is if it's left untreated, whatever's originally driving it continues to drive it, and people can progress between stage 1, 2, 3, ultimately up to stage 4. Not everyone progresses though. Some people just get to stage 2 and that's where their body stays. What we're thinking is happening is the earlier it starts, like if you go through adolescence and you get a big sort of jump in this, which is typical with those hormones fluctuating, and then you have a number of pregnancies and then you have menopause, it's kind of multiple impacts. There's some people that don't start to experience the growth of lipidemic fat until they get to menopause. So they've had all of those other years where everything's been fine, and then that's just the trigger for them. Yeah.
It's so interesting, isn't it? It's so interesting. And I know we spoke about this briefly, but hopefully maybe you'll be able to tell us, but how many women are you seeing at the moment in your own clinic that are experiencing these sort of conditions?
Oh, between 30 and 50, really. And I not only am I working with ladies here in Perth, I'm working with ladies. Just yesterday I was consulting with a lady in Germany. So, it's one of these conditions that people are becoming more aware of it, through endeavours like, having an International Awareness Month this month. But people are then searching out, like, who can help me with this? What is the best thing to be doing? And ultimately it becomes very multifactorial. There's not just one intervention. It's, lots of possible interventions, and then for ladies working out which one feels best and most comfortable for them.
Yes. And when we originally started looking at this, and when I did my own research, I guess the one thing that stood out for me is this feeling that people are going through a hypersensitivity to lots of things around them. So the inflammation is quite extreme. The body's response is such an extreme response.
Absolutely.
And so I guess from a scientist's perspective, my thought automatically went to, there's something going on here that's causing women to be hypersensitive, and that who knows what that's to. That could just be things they're putting on their skin, or they're eating, or they're breathing, or whatever. It could be a whole range of things. And so what's your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in many ways it's like that whole perfect storm scenario that, we live in a world that we're exposed to far more toxins than we've ever been in the past. Hormones are fluctuating more and more. Interestingly, one of the Facebook groups that I'm involved in, a lady posted a question yesterday and said, I'm just curious about what age women with lipodema started menstruating.
Yeah.
And it was really surprising. Between 9 and probably 11 was the most common responses. And automatically I went, 9 and 11, I would actually have thought that's incredibly early. I know that things are changing over time. I'm in my 50s, so it's different.
My brain always goes straight, okay, that's estrogen.
Yes.
Like, that's a high estrogen, but we've also got xenoestrogens, right? We've got all of this, and I know I've spoken about this in a previous episode where I discussed all about xenoestrogens and how prevalent they are in our society right now through everything, perfumes and skincare and sunscreens and all sorts of
Microwaving
things.
and plastic.
Oh my gosh, plastic is one of the worst. Okay, and everything comes in plastic. I mean, I'm probably sitting around plastic, right? Like it really worries me, but at the same time you have to live your life. But that is really interesting because starting the bleed, like menstruating that early, is quite rare in a sense,
Well, I would have assumed so, but I know that it is becoming more and more common. But I think it just shows that our hormones are significantly impacted by a whole lot of factors going on in our environment these days.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Keep me updated on these things that come through because, the goal is to help people, and the goal is to try and build more awareness of this so that we can help our daughters too.
Absolutely.
Because it is predominantly a female situation. So if we can really build awareness around what kids are putting on their skin and what they're eating and things, maybe we can help this progression anytime in the future as well.
Absolutely. And that's one of our key messages, that the earlier this is picked up, even if someone just suspects this, it's better to go and get assessed and be told, no, not your issue, than just sit around waiting and having things progress without you knowing some of the fundamental at-home practices that you can do to help support this. But typically if a lady was to go in and get assessed, like I said, it would be through an occupational therapist or a physiotherapist that specialises in lymphedema. Those that specialise in lymphedema also know typically about lipodema, and they would then start to help you get on the path to managing that condition. Wearing compression garments is a really common intervention.
Yeah, that's really just for inflammation though, right? Just to kind of push it down, is that right?
So it helps with lymph, but what we also believe is it helps because the compression garments really sort of help hold in everything. Yeah. It's helping to improve that sort of structure. It's almost like putting another external skeleton around the skin, so it's helping to hold it in so it's not so painful.
Are they getting more bruising? I'm curious. From having any compression garments on, because the skin is very sensitive, isn't it? If they're putting the pressure on the skin, is there an increase in bruising at all?
Interestingly, that's not something that I've heard my ladies say.
Okay, that's good.
There's certain types of compression. I mean, we're not just talking about the off-the-shelf compression, although some people do start with that because compression garments are expensive. And
super expensive. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about how we can treat.
Sure.
Okay, because now we've talked about all the doom and gloom, it's okay, right? Yeah. So obviously building awareness is the number one thing, and reaching out to people who understand what's going on and seeing if you can be assessed is another great way. But and understanding the stages is also really important, so you can be a little bit more aware of what's happening with your body. But let's talk about the other side to that, and how we can treat that. What does that look like?
So I think if you'd had the conversation with someone 10 years ago, they would have said, maybe manual lymphatic drainage, wearing compression, there's really nothing else that you can do. There was very much the prevailing feeling that exercise and lifestyle really didn't make any difference with this condition. But, 10 years on, now I would say, oh my goodness, there's so much that has been learnt about this condition.
Yeah.
There's been some fascinating research done overseas with different sorts of diets. Originally, I guess the recommendation was to eat a sort of an anti-inflammatory or a non-inflammatory type diet. We've already touched on why that may be beneficial. It's really probably morphed over the last 5 years to seeing the benefits of a ketogenic diet, which is, very exciting because we typically think of a ketogenic diet as something that would be helpful for young children with epilepsy, which was originally what it was developed for.
Yeah.
But now we're seeing a ketogenic diet helping. Gosh, I was just reading a paper yesterday on the benefits of a ketogenic diet with cancer.
Yes.
And, we know that it's anti-inflammatory, and now we're seeing that for both lipodema and lymphedema, there's some really profound benefits that are happening for people by lowering their carbohydrate intake. And it's a bit kind of counter maybe to what our government health recommendations are at present about, the whole food pyramid or food plate.
Look, I've said this before very openly. There are nearly 8 billion people on the planet. Okay, there's not going to be one diet to fit everybody. It's not possible. It's just not. Everybody has such a different upbringing, evolution, experience, where their families are, originated from, what was available, what's seasonal. So there's so many things that come into play, and I think it's crazy really to think that a food pyramid is going to work for everybody because it doesn't. And, the key messages all the time that I say is that just because all the food's available, especially in our Western world, doesn't mean we have to eat everything, okay? Not everything's going to agree.
You mean we shouldn't just walk into the supermarket and try everything?
No, because not everything's going to agree with you, is it?
Exactly.
Okay? It just doesn't. And I think that there is such misinformation out there is that there's something wrong with you if you can't eat these foods. It's like, well, no, actually there's not. Sometimes
maybe it's something wrong with the foods that we can't eat them.
Where have they come from? Where have they been sourced? What's been put onto them? How have they been grown? There's a whole range of issues that come through. Bread is not the bread that it used to be, 1,000, 2,000 years ago. It's completely different, right?
Absolutely.
The grains that we used to use, how it was processed and made is completely different to what it is now. It's all just full of rubbish now. It's just let's make it really wide and bleach it, and let's add this and let's add that, it's not even real. So tell us a little bit more about a keto diet. So I've talked about keto quite a lot, and I always say to people having metabolic flexibility is really important, so that you can go in and out of different, diets, but essentially using intuition and knowing what your body needs and what makes it feel good is really important. But we know with a ketogenic diet that it allows the body to go into a place of autophagy, where it self-eats. So for people who aren't familiar or haven't listened to the podcast before where I talk about autophagy, it's where the body self-eats the cells, okay? So it will actually go along and go, oh, I actually need some more fuel, so I'm going to start breaking down all of these bad, debris-looking, very sad-looking cells and use them for fuel. And so it's very important, and we know that there's so much paperwork and so much scientific information out there now about how autophagy is so important. There was a Nobel Peace Prize just recently, I think in 2016, where we finally have, we already knew all of this, but we finally acknowledged it and went, well, yeah, we've been trying to say this forever, putting the body into a natural state of fasting and self-eating and self-cleaning is so important, but it's finally been recognised, and that was only 6 years ago. Can you believe it?
It's crazy when you think about the time, that we didn't understand these things. And I often talk to my clients about the fact that we live in perpetual summer these days. And, well, it's winter these days, but perpetual summer in terms of food is so abundant.
Yeah.
But if we think back ancestrally, our ancestors went through periods of feast and potentially periods of famine, and the body was well designed to cope with both of those. Some people had a genetic advantage.
Yeah.
And we're actually beginning to think maybe this lipodema was a genetic advantage, that Maybe women with this condition were able to store their weight in areas that weren't damaging. We know that weight gain around the middle and around our vital organs is really detrimental to heart health and all sorts of other things.
All that visceral fat, we don't want that. Yeah.
And so maybe preferentially the body says, well, for you, I'm going to store it in your legs, and potentially we know that this condition also affects arms. We often talk about it just being in the legs, but it does infect the arms as well. But it's keeping it away from those visceral organs. So, there maybe was an advantage at some point where we could survive and long enough to bear children and, continue.
Fasting is such an important part. Like going through famine is actually such an important part of our cycle with the seasons, right?
Absolutely.
And like you said, we're in winter now, and so typically this is the time where people eat more and they eat more comfort foods and they kind of like, it's a bit more luxury, but really it's supposed to be the opposite. We're actually supposed to be fasting right now, okay? Because we should have put on weight and stored all of our vitamin D and everything through summer. So we should be good to fight off any sort of immune attacks. And we should be coming into winter and going, okay, well, I've got a little bit of weight to lose because I've put some on over summer. That's okay because I can fast a little bit, but people don't fast anymore.
Well,
right?
we don't.
We don't need to because we just go to the shop and everything's available, but the body hasn't evolved that way. So anyway,
let's go back to talk about
keto.
keto.
Let's go talk about that. So tell us more.
Yeah, so ketogenic way of eating, and I often talk about it as being a way of eating rather than a diet, because many of the ladies that I talk to have a vast history of dieting, on diet, off a diet, on a diet, off a diet. And I think that really messes with our heads a little bit.
It's so detrimental, isn't it? Yeah, the whole concept of diet and people going, I've tried this diet, I've tried this diet, this diet, this diet, rather than going, I've used an intuitive way of eating and these foods work for me and these foods don't work for me, instead of trying to box it into a category. Sorry, back to keto.
No, so in terms of, ketogenic diet, and like I said, a ketogenic way of eating, most of us in the Western world use sugar as our main source of fuel in the body. We're just constantly, burning sugar that comes from our carbohydrates. So, pasta, bread, all of the other things that we grains
and vegetables and fruits.
Oh, yes, and vegetables
like
and fruit. Yep. So healthy foods as well. Our body uses that glucose and it turns it into energy, and, we can get up in the morning and have energy to do all the things we need to do. But our bodies naturally have the capacity to both burn sugar as fuel and carbohydrates as fuel during those times of plenty.
Yes.
That summer, but maybe in winter we needed to be a little bit more, protective in the way that we managed our body system. Yeah. And so the body can actually use an alternative fuel source, and we refer to those as ketones. And what a ketogenic diet, that is a diet that removes the vast majority of those carbohydrates from the diet and focuses more on quality protein, healthy fats, those non-starchy vegetables. You mentioned before that vegetables do have carbs in them. We think of potatoes as being very high in carbs, but then we have a lot of vegetables that we would call non-starchy or lower carbohydrate vegetables, including those as the more predominant parts of the diet. We sort of trick the body into thinking it's that winter, that period of leanness, and our body moves over into producing ketones. Yeah. And if you think about this in terms of a car, the glucose is like a dirty fuel. It does its job really well. It gets us where we need to go, but it produces a lot of exhaust.
And it's a fast, instant result, right?
We get highs and lows, up and down all day, whereas ketones are a much cleaner source of fuel. They're far more effective, and they seem to do a whole lot of wonderful things in our cells. For one, they're anti-inflammatory.
Yes.
So we get a whole lot of benefits. And one of the things that I often experience with my ladies with lipodema is we talk about, let's just test out this way of eating. And I often refer to my clients and say, let's just test these things out. Going back to that intuition that you've mentioned before.
Yeah.
Let's do an experiment. We're not talking about forever. Let's just do an experiment and see how your body responds. Yeah. I'll get text messages. I've had no pain all day and I don't understand why. And I'm like, well, let me explain.
Yes, so good.
It brings down the level of inflammation in the body. And so by reducing inflammation, we feel more energetic. We're more likely to get out and go for a walk. We can play with the kids. We can do the things that we want to be able to do, which improves our quality of life. So this is, I think, where a lot of the benefits are coming from. And surprisingly, what we're seeing is that ladies that have say to me, I have not been able to lose weight off the areas of lipodema in 20 years.
Yeah.
I'm actually seeing changes. They're not rapid, but they're saying to me, my clothes feel a little bit, more sort of comfortable. In fact, I had a funny conversation with a client the other day. I was just touching base with her and I said, how's everything going? She said, well, I haven't noticed much change on the scales, but I can definitely tell you that my body shape is changing because I was at the supermarket and I was wandering along with my trolley and I realised my pants were around my ankles.
Oh, whoops.
I was like, and you're okay with this? She's like, well, not really, but
yeah.
She said, I was so surprised because I didn't realise that my body was actually changing. And I think that's another benefit of a ketogenic way of eating. You mentioned before about autophagy and about it's like a bit of a cleanup process. We actually think that autophagy goes in and cleans up some of this scar tissue as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is doing some really profound things when we think about lipodema potentially being this scar tissue.
Yeah.
It makes sense that it would be changing what's going on.
Absolutely. And it takes a little while to get there, though, with autophagy, right?
Of course.
It's not going to be an instant thing. I want to put that little disclaimer out there.
Yeah, of course.
For people who are, again, looking for that kind of quick solution to things, unfortunately, it does take a little while for the body to go from a glycolysis, which is a glucose burning, over to a ketogenic sort of ketosis type diet.
And it can be a little bit rough those first couple of weeks.
Yes.
It's almost like an engine change or a motor change in the car.
Yes.
It takes some processes.
Absolutely.
And I often feel like that's where it's best to sort of walk through that process with someone that's walked that path before.
Yeah, definitely.
But we do have a lot of great resources around these days. We know with ladies with lipodema that the typical internet type keto diet, that's maybe some people might refer to it as a bit like dirty keto, where it's as long as the carbs are low, I can eat whatever I want, probably doesn't work. We really need to be focusing on a whole food, real food type diet where we're removing those processed foods that have damaged vegetable oils in them. We really want to be eating
all those omega-6s that are so out there, that sunflower oil is in everything, isn't it? Oh, so frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, we want to move to good fats and things, but, not many people understand how that works, which is why it's so important to go and speak to someone like yourself and then get a really good picture of how food works and what's the right food to actually be eating, rather than going, okay, I'm going to start a keto diet and I'm just going to eat cheese.
And salami.
It doesn't quite work like that, because we don't want to miss out on all our vitamins and minerals and our good, healthy oils and things like that. It's so important to keep that up. Otherwise, it's not maintainable.
That's right.
That's the other thing too, is that people, transitioning from glycolysis into ketosis, like you said, there is that transitional period and it can be really rough. And it's because we're losing electrolytes quickly, especially when we're decreasing in this inflammation, we're flushing out. So I've got another episode specifically on exercise and electrolytes. So please listen to that. And I talk about electrolytes a lot because they're so important. So magnesium, potassium, sodium, those sorts of things, even in your water is going to help. I kind of refer them to as like the key to the door of the cell. Mm-hmm. So they're these little key and they come along and they like fit into the correct little door lock and they open the door and they allow things to come in and out. They allow electrical impulses through, all those sorts of things. So when you're actually moving from a glucose burning to a fat burning, you need to have a good amount of electrolytes because you lose a lot when you're dropping all of the inflammation. People don't realize that. They come back with headaches and migraines and they're like, I feel like I have no energy, and like you said it was going to be amazing. I was going to have all this energy, and I'm like, okay, but you've got to support yourself in the process.
Yes.
Okay, there's got to be support there and understanding of actually what you're doing. I think that's the main thing, is that the transitional period, if you've been a glucose burning individual for the majority of your life, it takes practice, and it is hard sometimes for people not to fall off the wagon, because it's like, but I just really felt like the chocolate, and I really I really feel like it, and that can throw people right out of whack, you know, through just small simple things like that, and we all know that sugar is just the worst. Most of us know that sugar is just the worst for inflammation. It doesn't make the cells very happy at all. But it's so addictive, isn't it?
Like, absolutely.
So addictive. It's a massive problem, and it just makes us feel so good, and all the brain chemistry just goes, wow.
the reward center in the brain lights up. It's like, oh, I'm happy.
I'm so happy. I'm so happy. I'm so happy. I'm sad again. Oh, I'm going to have some more. Oh, I'm so happy. It's so temporary. Whereas when we get onto a fat burning side, the amount of energy is obviously 4 times as much as what it is on a glucose side. So you should have more energy. You should be seeing these changes in the body where body shape is changing because it is actually cleaning up some of these bad cells and pushing them out and detoxifying them. You would expect that to happen.
Yeah, but it doesn't, like you said before, it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And that's where it's really beneficial to understand why and what's going on, what the process will be. I think if you're expecting it and you've got some strategies to manage it, you can certainly get through that to the other side where, yes, you start to feel amazing. Brain fog, which is so common for so many people these days, it just seems to like disappear. Like the brain works so much better.
Yeah.
We do need glucose for the brain and the body will make it should we need it.
Yeah.
But what we're really finding is that something about being in ketosis just being very, very good for the brain. And it's interesting. We know with ketogenic diet how much value it has in helping us to become more insulin sensitive.
Yeah.
And we know that so many people out in the general population have dysregulated blood sugar.
Yes.
And, even some scientists are starting to refer to things as like Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes.
Yeah.
And just the other day I read a research paper where they were referring to PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, as type 4 diabetes.
Yeah.
And so we know that a ketogenic diet is also wonderful for helping people that already have these conditions, but also from a preventative point of view, that if we can move over to a way of eating where we feel full, eating in a ketogenic way, you tend to be more satiated. It's very easy to go from breakfast to lunch or, brunch to dinner, not being hungry between meals.
Absolutely.
Because we're not getting those carbohydrate highs and dips and highs and dips. So.
I notice a difference because I practice keto very often. I try to have a lot of flexibility in how I eat. And so I fast most mornings, and then I only eat 2 meals in the day. I eat what my body needs as well. That's the other thing is I think it's really important to recognize that we don't need to be eating as much as what we're told we eat, right?
Yes.
Like, breakfast and morning tea and lunch and afternoon tea and dinner and then snacks before bed. It's a lot of food. Like the body just doesn't need it and it needs to shut down overnight and have a bit of a break so it can clean out all of the crap that's in there.
Yes.
That's so important. Run the dishwasher, as one of my fellow colleagues says. You got to run that dishwasher.
I love that as a way of just thinking about the process of what we do when we have those periods of time where we don't eat. Intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, all of these things have some really profound benefits.
And we practice that. We have, from an evolution perspective, we have always practiced that. It's just that now we don't. So there would have been times or days where we would have been out hunting for food and there wasn't anything to eat. So your body is naturally able to adapt to that space. It just takes a little bit of time to readjust and to welcome it. But the body actually loves it. Like I actually love fasting. Like my body just benefits from it so much. And the brain fog clears like straight away, like I just think how clear my brain functions when I've been running in that space for a little while. Like I just I can remember things like people will say, do you remember blah, blah? I'm like, yep, I remember. Here's the answer, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, wow, I just downloaded that so quickly. Where did that come from? That was 10 years ago or something. But it's amazing how, and you're right about the type 3 diabetes, because even though it hasn't been officially named yet, it is very well known in the community, in the scientific world, that it is potentially going to be Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes. And it is because of this massive influx and the damage that glucose and the abundance of glucose and carbohydrates is having on the brain and causing so much inflammation in the brain.
Yes.
And, there's an opportunity right now, right here, to actually start really becoming aware of that, because it may just have the potential to change your life in the future.
Absolutely. But I think, I've worked in this area for a while and some people just don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
And that's hard, but we obviously have to just be respectful of people
Absolutely.
at different places in their journey, of course. But certainly that's a message that I love to share with people. But we have the ability to make decisions about our health now that are going to have profound benefits to us 20, 30, 40,
Yes.
50 years potentially
Absolutely.
down the track. And
Yeah.
we are the masters of our own destiny in terms of the choices that we make. And yes, sometimes it does feel like swimming against the tide. That you're going against all of the current thinking. Some of my clients will tell me they've been to the doctor and they've said, this is what I'm doing. I feel great. And the doctor's like, oh, no, that's bad for you.
The whole cholesterol thing, don't even get me started on that, right? So that's a whole other topic altogether. But yes, I completely agree with you. Like there are definitely times where you feel like you're going against the current, and there's only so far that you can actually go as far as communicating. And it is up to everybody as individuals to really tap inwards and see what works for them, because they have those answers already. But you're right. Some people are not ready. They're just not ready for the information, and they don't want to give up all of their foods or change the way that they do things. They're just not ready for that. And so these are the consequences at times, that they have to kind of live through and navigate once they get to that stage.
Yeah.
But we're always here, right? That's the thing.
That's it,
We're
yes.
always here to help. And so that's the main thing too. No judgment. We're here. We've got you. And so if any point, you need to come and see us, Carrie and I are here for you guys. And so tell me, just while we wrap up as well, tell me a little bit about the awareness, what's happening this month as well.
So internationally for all of June, there's a lot of lipedema awareness events going on. We have an Australia-wide event happening in June, a big conference. But here in Perth, we actually have our inaugural Lipodema Awareness Afternoon, which is coming up on the 25th. And that's where we're inviting women that may hear something about this condition and think, is that something that's relevant to me? Come along, learn a little bit more about it. We're going to have some occupational therapists, physiotherapists speaking about their approach, because they're more about the manual therapies and what you can be doing in your everyday life. I'm going to be sharing a little bit more about the dietary approach. And then it's really, I say to people, it's about picking and choosing.
Yes.
You learn about all of these options that are available to you and then test them out, see what resonates with you, see what helps you personally. Some of our women find just exercising in a pool is incredibly beneficial in the way that it sort of acts as a sort of a form of compression. So that's really beneficial. Some people use like a vibration plate or various other tools and things that are available these days.
Do you ever recommend cold plunge?
So hot and cold is fantastic for the lymphatics. Even just turning your shower to cold. Yes. I would love to say that I regularly do it because I know how beneficial it is. It really sort of gives the body this tiny little shock that then the body upregulates all these defensive processes. Yeah.
So good at reducing inflammation.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. Well, we see our athletes do it, don't we? We see them in their ice baths after a footy game.
Absolutely. It's so good. I have a cold plunge at home. So I have a freezer at home that I jump into.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's funny, I do it more so in winter than in summer.
Really?
I find that I'm just drawn to it in winter so much more. And so like the sauna and the freezer. So and I go in between. But I like going into the ocean now even. Just that's a great way to do it too, because we're in winter here in Perth, and
so it is a bit chilly in the water.
It is chilly, but it's so therapeutic. Yes. Just go with a friend though, because if you're not used to that, right, and you're going out into the ocean, it can be quite intense. Whereas if you're in a container, it's usually a bit better. You can just hop straight out. But the ocean can be quite intense. But just having cold therapy or cryotherapy. A lot of people use cryotherapy as well. And so when you're blasted with that nitrogen, from liquid nitrogen.
Yeah, I've certainly been hearing a lot more about it. We know with lipodema that it hasn't actually, a lot of women have tried it, haven't seen a change in their lipodema, but you're saying, I think from an anti-inflammatory point of view, it probably has some benefits to it. And it's always for us, it's about experimenting a little bit with ourselves, finding out what feels good for us, because what works for one isn't going to work for everyone. And some things are going to feel more comfortable, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely one of those things that you have to get used to. But once you do, it's addictive. You should try it.
I really should. I just know there's some, you said before that, you feel a bit more drawn to this cold therapy in winter. It's so good for our circulation. Yeah. That women say to me, once I even just do the cold, turning the shower to cold just for 30 seconds at the end. Yeah. you would think that you would come out freezing, and initially you do.
Yeah.
But over time, your body really adapts to it, and you
Yes.
find that the circulation's better. You don't tend to have as much of that cold feet that we tend to get
Yeah.
in winter.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's really interesting. And these
Yep.
things, like you mentioned before, sauna, cold therapy, these are ancestrally what people have done.
I know. It was so normal for people in winter to jump into a cold plunge in the ice river.
Yeah.
That's what they did, right? And then when it was those beautiful saunas that they had, especially in Europe, where they were just using the there's hot springs and all of those things that they would jump into and sweat and get out all of the toxins. I mean, it's such an ancient ancestral therapy that we
Yeah.
just forget about. We forget these things.
Well, new things come on board and
Yeah.
we think, give away the old things. But I think there's really a resurgence these days in acknowledging that many of these ancient cultures had all sorts of fascinating things. I think about Chinese medicine and the way that they
Yes.
understood the body and the meridians, that only now we're starting to think, maybe they were onto something, as far as, mainstream science is starting to look at some of those ancient cultures, the Ayurvedic, out of India and even some of those more ancient cultures that looked at the stars and looked at, they learned all about their world.
Yeah.
And they had some amazing insights
I know.
that got lost.
I know. I agree with you. I think looking to our elders, so to speak, and that's how sometimes we do. We need to look back at what they were doing, and they've been doing them for thousands of years. Like, what did they know that what got lost along the way, and what could we do, and what things might resonate with us now? And I love trying all different types of things as well myself, and seeing what works for me. And some things don't work, and some things do, but you've got to give it a go.
Yes.
Otherwise you don't know. Get outside your comfort zone and try different things, because you might be surprised that one thing that you're super uncomfortable with might actually help you, might relieve some of the pain, might reduce inflammation, might make you feel good. I mean, cold therapy releases so many chemical changes in the brain that I literally feel like I'm on a high 20 minutes after. I'm like, oh my God, the world is so amazing.
Yeah, those endorphins just flood your body.
It's like at the time it's like, oh, this is really uncomfortable, but I'm pushing through and I can do this, just keep breathing. But then 20 minutes later, I'm like, oh my God, the world is amazing. How lucky are we to be alive? All of this crazy stuff. It's been so lovely chatting with you today.
Yeah,
is there
for
anything
sure.
that you wanted to add before we finish?
No, well, I think we've talked about all sorts of
know,
things. It's been
yeah.
such a fun conversation. I really appreciate
has.
you.
You're so welcome. And thank you for coming in and chatting and communicating this really important issue to all of the people out there, because maybe you might not be struggling with this particular issue yourself, but maybe you have a mum or a grandmother or an aunt or a sister or a daughter who might be struggling with this.
Well, I think when we think of that statistic as potentially being 11% of the population, most of us know at least 10 people. So,
yeah, exactly.
Someone's likely to some degree be experiencing this, and just being able to point them in the direction of where to get more information. There's certainly more information online these days. Lipodema Australia have an online website, but there's lipodema organisations all over the world. Our awareness afternoon that's coming up is a great resource. But, just keep asking questions and keep trying to get to the bottom of what's going on, and that's going to be the most preventative way that you can move forward, I think.
And if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way that they can reach out?
Sure. So I have a website. It's just my name. So Carrie Reedy. Of course, I have to spell that because I don't know what my mum was thinking when she gave me the name Carrie, because no one can spell it. So it's Carrie, and my surname Reedy, Reedy, and just .com on the end. But lots of information on there, and but come along, anyone that wants to our information afternoon.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. And like always, everybody, if you've enjoyed today's chat, please leave me a 5-star review. Remember, this is free information. It's available to everyone. So if you've got someone out there that needs this information, please be sure to pass it on. And if you're just loving it, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review or some feedback. That would be amazing. If you have any questions, I am slowly getting through a lot of the questions that are coming through at the moment. So you'll see a lot of shorter episodes coming up your way. If you do have any more questions, just send them through, because I'm trying to get to all of them and answer them as quickly as possible for you guys now every week. I had a beautiful workshop on the weekend, the Divine Feminine Flow, and we'll be running the same workshop later this year, September 4. It's breath work, education on cycles, chemistry, the moon, nutrition, exercise, rituals, and some quantum mechanics because, you guys know I'm super nerd, so I'm going to throw some of that stuff in there. So you can check that out. Tickets are available on Eventbrite. And that's all. So until next time, take care and I'll see you later.
The information, views and opinions expressed on this podcast should not be used or treated as a substitute for nutritional, medical, psychological or other advice by a qualified medical health professional. Hosts and guests on the podcast express their own opinions, experiences and conclusions. And nothing on the podcast should be used to diagnose, treat, cure or prevent any medical conditions. The podcast is not intended to replace any medical or mental health treatment. All information and advice provided is for general well-being and does not take individual cases into consideration. Neither Tracy Saltis, guests on the podcast, or any sponsors endorse the opinions, views, or conclusions expressed or shared on the podcast. Tracy Saltis takes no responsibility for any symptoms or consequences as a direct or indirect result of this podcast.